I've been going through the old heads that I have. Seem to have a few of them now, and I've been taking out the valve guides out of them. Most of these heads are unusable. They're just far too corroded. But the valve guides may be reusable once I clean them up. I'll have to see. But I figure I might as well clean them up and see how sloppy they are on the valves I've got. And I may be able to get away with reusing some of these things rather than having to buy new stuff all the time. But I was looking at this head. I managed to get the guides out of this. One of them was already broken. I don't know what the story is with this one. The sort of inlet manifold is corroded away and is all cracked and broken, and it's full of this. Might be sand. I'm not really sure. Mud or sand. But the actual head itself, looking inside at the water passages, it isn't too corroded inside here. It actually seems pretty good. So I'm thinking if I can get the studs out of this, I mean these are well rusted away, but if I can get the studs out and get all of this off, because obviously this isn't reusable, this may be a good spare head to have. It actually looks in reasonably good condition, and of course I could have it skimmed and cleaned up, but the problem is going to be getting this off, because that's obviously well corroded on there. It may be a matter of sort of breaking it off piece by piece. I mean, it's already pretty broken, to be able to try and get the studs out. Same on this side. I'll soak them in penetrating stuff, and they'll probably use a bit of heat on them and see if I can get those to come out. I guess worst comes to worst, you end up drilling them out and re-threading the holes. But all inside here doesn't look too bad. Turn it over. Now it's a bit too dirty to see, but I don't think it's been cracked. Around here. It needs a good clean up to really be able to tell. But these often crack, and I've seen it with these broken off as well. So this one's obviously been sitting around for a long time, but it might clean up okay. What I'm hoping is, I'm still waiting for the tap and die set, so I can helicoil the other head, but the bits for that should arrive very shortly. I've completely run out of the TIG welding gas, so I can't repair the rear axle cover at the moment. Hopefully when we go to level 2, I think I should be able to go and collect some more of that. But yeah, this will be an interesting one to see if I can even get this off, but at least I don't have to worry about trying to get something off that I want to keep, because this is totally unusable. I'm not sure about the hot spot thing. We don't tend to use these anyway. I think this is cracked and broken as well. Got the old manifold off. I really have no idea what was going on with that. It's full of this sand, I guess. I think it's sand, which has kind of been packed into it, and there's some sort of rope or string that was packed all the way through the hot point thing, and that looks like a piece of cork or wood. You can see this has been, it's like it's been hammered in there. So I don't know if that means somebody blocked all that up at some point in the past or something. I managed to get it off in the end by cutting through a couple of the studs, and then one of them broke off in the head, unfortunately, but that's easy enough to drill out and fix. But I don't think, I mean, it looks scruffy, but I think this head may actually be in reasonable condition. It's just very mucky. So perhaps once lockdown is over, I can take it to an engine rebuilder and at least get them to put it in their hot tank or something, clean it up, and we can have a look at it and see what it's like. But I think I'm going to get the oxyacetylene out and see if I can remove these other studs. You can see just how corroded that one is. It's just so much thinner than it should be. Yeah, we'll see how it cleans up. I'm out in Big Shed again, just poking around with engine stuff, trying to figure out what I've got, what I need to order, and once again learning a bit more about the differences in all these different marks of Riley 9 engine. The one good thing is I left this head, which I think will make a good spare, with the studs soaking in my penetrating fluid here. So this penetrating fluid is just the acetone and ATF transmission fluid mixed together, and it actually works really well. So I left those sitting overnight and have actually managed to extract all 3 studs, and you can see these were quite worn out. So should just come out and you can see how worn down those are. So I'm amazed those came out, to be honest. The threads look okay. So as I say, I think this might be a decent spare head. I'd have to take it to a machine shop and get it all cleaned up, and they can probably face these for me, I would think. But it's good to have that there. I've also been going through my rocker gear collection to see if I've got a good set of rockers that I can actually use. The rockers aren't quite so critical to start with because you can easily replace them because they're all at the top of the engine. The valves and things like that are a bit harder. You'd have to take the head off. So I'm going to try and find a decent set of these to use from my parts. But I think I'm going to order new valves and new valve guides. I've got new springs. I'll need, I think that'll mean I'll be changing from these peg type where the valve has a little slot in it, and there's actually a little peg that goes through that, and that's what keeps the springs on. I think the new ones from the club have collets. So I think what I'm going to do is just replace all of those. It's probably wise, because then at least when I assemble the engine, it'll have new pistons, new rods, new crankshaft, new tappets, new valves, new valve guides. So if I have to change anything on the top end, that's easy enough because you just take the rocker cover boxes off. And I've been looking at this as well. So it turns out I've got 2 different marks of rocker cover boxes, and I was trying to figure out what the difference between them is. And it turns out it's all to do with the oil feed to the rockers, which also explains why when I was looking at the rocker shafts, so these fit through the covers, and the let me think which way around this would go. The rockers themselves sort of go in there. Obviously there's a pair of them. Bit hard to assemble with one hand. So basically they go through there, and the valves stick up, and those basically rock on the ends of the valves. Obviously there's springs that go in the middle here to keep them apart. That's what these are. I think I'll replace all the springs as well. I just don't trust old springs. They can go sort of brittle, I think, and they're cheap enough, so it's worth replacing those. There's only 4 of those. But let's pull all this apart again. These rockers are obviously handed, so what I'm hoping is I can put together a decent set from what I've got here. Some of them have been ground down pretty thin, others are pretty good, and I've got the hard face welding rod so I can build them up again as soon as I can get more TIG gas. But I was looking at these covers and looking at these pins, and it turns out that this is from an earlier engine, I think Mark 1 to 4. This is off a Mark 5, and the difference is underneath. I'm going to have to order new studs for these as well, of course. So the difference is the oil feed here. So these later engines had what's known as a internal oil feed. So oil comes up through the head and actually comes up this little hole, which matches with the hole in the rocker cover, and then that has to match with a hole in the rocker shaft. So this goes through there. The stud sort of holds it in place. That's why there's that little cutout there that stops those rotating. And so the oil would come up through this hole into the cover and then into the rocker into the shaft through that, which is why not all my rocker shafts have that little hole. So you can see these two are different. So these must be off a Mark 5 or later engine. The ones without the hole are from the earlier engine. To further confuse things, is it this one? No, it's this one. I also have these ones, a few of these, where there's some sort of threaded fitting in the end, and the holes are actually in different places. So I'm not sure what these are from. So that would kind of shift the oil holes over a little bit. I'm not sure if that matters or not. So, like I say, I'm trying to find the best set of these that I can from the parts I've got. The original head I was going to use doesn't have those oil feeds. So this is obviously an early head. So you can see this is the front of the engine because this is where the water outlet is. Or is that the inlet? I'm not really sure. I think that would be the outlet, I guess. But this head doesn't have it. This one does. And so, let's see. What's this one? Well, this one does have it as well, so this is obviously a later one. But that's only going to be useful if you've got the right block where it's got the internal oil feeds. And I think because mine is an earlier block, I don't. So there's no oil that comes up those holes. Look at this one. It's a bit hard to tell where those oil passages go. But I think, up a valve off the floor. I think everything works fine if I use the earlier gear and the earlier rocker shafts, and I use the external oil piping. So you can see the shafts have a hole through the end, and there are these brass plugs that thread into the end. But my engine, when I got it, was set up for an external oil feed. So there's actually an oil pipe that comes out the top here, comes up to a Y pipe with little fittings that go on the end of the rocker covers there, and that's how the oil gets up to the top end. So I'm pretty sure I can carefully mix and match the parts I've got. And it should work fine. So I suspect all I have to do is make sure I don't use a shaft with a hole here, because I suspect let me think about this. It depends how this oil passage is, but you wouldn't want oil coming in the front here and then just coming straight out this hole, draining back down into the bottom of the engine. I do have, I think, more rocker covers. I'll see what sort those are. I didn't realise at the time I had these like this and sent them away that they were different. So I may actually have the correct earlier rocker cover. It's not going to be as shiny because I never sent it away for vapor blasting. But I think if I use 2 early covers, that's going to block off that oil hole, which I'm sure doesn't do anything. I'm pretty sure these are just drains, maybe. Yeah, you can see that these front ones just drain straight through. So no oil is going to be coming up those. I'm not sure what the story is on the bottom ones. So I think this will all work. Obviously when I put the engine together, one of the first things you do once it's all fully assembled is turn it over by hand and see that oil gets to everywhere it needs to get to. So I think I'm going to look through my other covers, see if I've got another early one. And I think that's all I really need to do, because it won't matter if the shaft has that hole there, because it won't be able to, the oil won't go anywhere. Because once this is in this housing, that housing sort of blocks that oil hole, I think. Yeah, it's really confusing, these different Marks O'Reilly engine, and it isn't really explained anywhere. You kind of have to go through the parts book, and there's multiple parts books, and you have to know from the parts books what mark of car it is to get some idea of what the right parts are. So I'm slowly figuring it out. Went through all my parts, and I did find 2 of the earlier rocker covers. So I've just given them a quick wire brush on the outside. They need a really good clean, but they should come up okay. And I much prefer the look of those. So these are the ones that I had vapor blasted, and they just come up too clean. It doesn't look vintage. When you first get them back, they look like they're painted, spray painted silver. So I much prefer a sort of duller finish, and you can help that along with like a Scotch pad and rub them, and then eventually they get covered in oil and grease, and they kind of look right. They look like an old car, not something that's been polished to within an inch of its life. So I'd rather have it with oil leaks and looking its age, rather than being all nice and shiny, as long as it's all functional. So I think those have cleaned up quite well, and that takes care of the oil thing. Like I say, the little hole there won't matter because it doesn't go anywhere, and I'm sure I've got the external oil piping for it somewhere, but I'm going to look at redoing all of the oil piping anyway. I think that's probably it for tonight. I'm in my little lab again, playing around with laser cutting gaskets. This will be the gasket for the oil pump. So my workflow is basically draw the gasket as a sketch in Fusion 360, and then export that as a DXF, and then I can directly import the DXF into the laser software, this Lightburn software, and then I can do a test cut on a piece of paper. It turns out that white paper isn't the best thing to use. I'll start this going. See the lasers over there. The white paper is so reflective, you need quite a bit of power to burn through it, way more than you actually need to cut the paper, because the light just reflects off it. And interestingly, with this squared paper, you can see that really well, where the laser doesn't start burning until it hits one of the inked lines, and then the laser can start burning, and once it starts burning it just keeps going. But you'll see little gaps in the cut. If the laser's not in the way, there are little gaps in the cut where the laser didn't start until it hit the line. But it's good enough for me to then do a quick test fit. I need to get some coloured paper, just very thin paper, maybe some brown paper. I think we've probably got shopping bags or something like that I can use, which also make good gaskets sometimes if you need very thin ones. I'm sort of mangling this, but basically what I do is do a test print like this, or a test cut like this rather, so I can just make sure that the gasket is lining up properly. And you can see this one, I've got the holes in the wrong place. This little hole at the top is very important, so you want to make sure that all lines up. So you can sort of see from this that I need to just tweak things a little bit. And of course the beauty of using CAD to do all this is I can just come in here and edit the dimensions on my sketch and have another go. So just by changing the dimensions I can shuffle things around. I found some thin brown paper, so I'm using that now as my test piece. You can see I'm a lot closer. Probably one more tweak and that should do it. I am going to make those holes a little bit bigger just so they don't show out the ports at all. But I'll try that in a second. Turn my ventilation up to full just to get rid of the smoke. The other thing I do on this laser is I have a separate board that I cut things on, and you can see that was the previous gasket I cut. One of the reasons I do that is so I don't have to be so particular with where I lay out the work, because I can just move the board underneath it. And the laser software has this useful feature where you can see where it's going to cut. It sort of traces around the outside of the part, and that's why I've got this little laser diode on here, very low powered red one. So that shows me where it's going to cut, and now I can just fire up the laser. Because this is brown paper, I can do much faster cuts. But I think this will actually need 2 passes just to make sure it's gone all the way through. So as long as you don't move anything, you could just recut, and it just follows the same path. And you can see now as the pieces come loose, the paper curls up a little bit. And that's when you have to be careful it doesn't catch on fire. So there's my test gasket. And you can see now that all lines up pretty well. So now I can go ahead and cut a small piece of gasket paper and laser cut that. The nice thing about using the laser, even though I know I could make these gaskets by hand if I really want to, is the repeatability. So once I've drawn the gasket once, I can cut as many as I want, and from whatever thickness gasket paper I want. So I'm not entirely certain what thickness gasket I need under the oil pump so it all lines up correctly. So I've cut a couple of them. One other useful trick with this laser cutting is when you cut something out like this gasket, if you put a layer of tape over the top, the tape should get most of the burning, so you end up with a nice clean edge to the cut. I'll peel the tape off this and see if that's worked. You can see on this gasket the burning is a lot less if you have tape there. This should just be a fairly tight fit. There we go. This is just the oil filler cover. I'm not sure what kind of gasket actually needs to go on this, but I thought I'd just use that as an experiment to cut one. I did want to, I've measured up and modelled up the gaskets for the torque tube, which are just in here, just very simple models. And when I was doing it, when I was measuring the cover, I actually discovered that it's cracked at the bottom here. There was a crack all the way through near one of the mounting bolt holes. So I started TIG welding that back together, and I was going to weld both sides of the crack. I managed to weld the inside fine, and then I ran out of gas. So I'll have to wait until after lockdown before I can get more gas for that. But that little gasket should work on there quite nicely. This was the test of the cover gasket, just from very thin brown paper. Because it's so thin, it's hard to get it to sit flat, but that gives me a good enough template to test fit on the cover and just make sure I've got the basic dimensions correct.